Throughout history, many countries, unions, and sovereign states have emerged and disappeared. One such defunct state is Gran Colombia, or Greater Colombia, which existed from 1819 to 1831. Gran Colombia, referred to as Colombia at the time, included the present-day nations of Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, and Venezuela, along with portions of what are now Peru and Brazil. During its existence, the state was widely respected and considered one of the most significant and esteemed nations in Spanish America. John Quincy Adams, the U.S. Secretary of State at the time of Gran Colombia's formation, regarded it as one of the most powerful countries in the world. Despite the favorable view of Gran Colombia from neighboring America, gaining international recognition from Europe was more challenging. There was disagreement between Gran Colombia's leadership and some European states regarding the extent of territory over which Gran Colombia had legitimate authority. France, Russia, and Austria were particularly unwilling to recognize the new nation's independence unless it, along with any other country in the Americas seeking the same recognition, was willing to accept a monarch from a European dynasty. Despite this, Gran Colombia was officially declared in 1819 with the fundamental law of the Republic of Colombia, enacted by the Congress of Angostura. The establishment of the new sovereign state was formalized in 1821 when the Congress of Cúcuta enacted the Constitution of Cúcuta. However, Gran Colombia soon faced internal conflicts, as the country was split between those who supported a strong centralized government and others who advocated for a decentralized federal government similar to that of the United States. Moreover, a segment of the population against a strong centralized presidency even pushed for the new state to split into several smaller republics. This stance directly opposed those who sought to enhance the presidency's power, as well as a third group that supported the existing constitution of Cúcuta. At the time, Gran Colombia was governed by the very constitution that some of its citizens opposed, with Simón Bolívar serving as president and Francisco de Paula Santander as vice president. In this structure, the president served as the leader of both the central and local executive branches. The vice president was designated to step in if the president became absent, impeached, ill, or deceased. Locally, the country was divided into 12 departments, each led by an intendant. These departments were further divided into 36 provinces, which were overseen by governors whose authority overlapped with that of the respective intendant. Intendants and governors were chosen by the central government, which included the president, vice president, a bicameral Congress, and a high court. The president and vice president were also chosen through indirect elections. Despite the inherent political divisions, the government remained relatively stable. However, one significant error that Gran Colombia may have made was its rapid involvement in the surrounding provinces' fight for freedom from Spanish rule. Gran Colombia assisted Venezuela, Panama, Pasto, Quito, and other Spanish-American states, most of which joined the Federation between 1821 and 1822. In 1824, Peru became the next neighbor to gain independence from Spain, thanks to support from Gran Colombia. With political unrest within the new state set aside, and Bolívar and Santander having proven themselves as heroes for Spanish America, the duo was re-elected in 1826. Even with the temporary unity against the Spanish, the Federalist and Regionalist factions within Gran Colombia persisted. Once the war against Spain ended, political discord was reignited. Additionally, economic and commercial disputes began to arise from the pre-existing tensions. Modern-day Ecuador, in particular, faced long-standing economic issues dating back to the 18th century, when its textile industry was adversely affected by cheaper imported textiles. Opting for a low-tariff policy to aid regions like modern-day Venezuela in their agricultural endeavors, Gran Colombia overlooked the economic struggles of Ecuador. President Bolívar, preoccupied with defeating the royalists in Peru, couldn't address Ecuador's issues. Ecuador also faced political grievances, feeling significantly underrepresented by a government primarily composed of Venezuelans and New Granadans at the local level. Despite these unresolved issues, Ecuador never became a major player in the anti-central government movements, much to Bolivar's relief. Instead, and somewhat surprisingly, Venezuela emerged as a primary instigator of this sentiment. José Antonio Páez, who had previously fought against the Spanish monarchy under President Bolívar, now served as the Commandant General of the Department of Venezuela and led the movement against the central government. By 1826, the Congress grew weary of Páez's new stance and initiated impeachment proceedings against him. In a bold act of defiance, Páez initially stepped down from his position, but just 2 days later, he decided to reassume the role with the backing of local people who also opposed the central government. To complicate matters further for the president and his administration, a junta pledged their support for Páez and his movement. In an attempt to counteract this opposition, President Bolívar promoted a new constitution he had written for Bolivia. However, this tactic largely backfired, resulting in either indifference or aggressive opposition from various groups, most notably from his own Vice President Santander. The situation escalated, leading to 2 assemblies convening in Venezuela to discuss the possibility of independence or other potential alternatives for their future. No decision regarding independence from Gran Colombia was made at that time, but the idea remained alive. Armed conflict eventually broke out in various regions of Venezuela, with the president's supporters clashing against Páez's followers. The discord persisted until President Bolívar extended an offer of amnesty and promised to convene a new constituent assembly to address the concerns of his Venezuelan adversaries. Páez agreed to the deal and acknowledged the president's authority. Although reforms were implemented, they did not satisfy his supporters, ultimately undermining the unity of Gran Colombia in the long term. It was during this period that the federation truly began to fall apart. Plagued from the outset by political disunity and a governmental structure deemed inadequate by many, Gran Colombia began its decline toward dissolution around 1828. In 1828, a new constituent assembly, known as the Convention of Ocaña, convened to discuss the future of the Union. President Bolívar attempted once more to promote his Bolivian constitution, hoping to base a new Gran Colombian constitution on it. However, he again found little support for this idea. Instead, a new federalist constitution was proposed. The president's supporters were so opposed to this that they not only refused to sign the constitution, but also walked out of the deliberations entirely. This effectively ended the convention and left President Bolívar in a precarious position, desperately needing to stabilize his nation. In a disastrous misstep, Bolívar attempted to prevent the Union from collapsing, believing that Vice President Francisco de Paula Santander, José María Obando, and José Antonio Páez were driving it toward dissolution by further centralizing his own constitutional powers. His efforts failed completely, and the nation was on an undeniable path toward dissolution. In 1830, Bolívar resigned in shame, knowing there was nothing more he could do. The political conflict only worsened after his departure, and finally, in 1831, the Federation of Gran Colombia was completely abolished. In its place, the republics of Venezuela, Ecuador, and New Granada were established. The Republic of New Granada would later become the Granadine Confederation in 1858 and eventually the United States of Colombia in 1863. Finally, in 1886, the modern-day name, the Republic of Colombia, was adopted. Panama remained a department of the Republic of Colombia, having chosen to join Gran Colombia during its prime, until 1903, when it gained independence largely due to pressure from the United States. This marked the ultimate dissolution of the Federation. Gran Colombia was inherently set up for failure from its inception. Political discord plagued its beginnings, and efforts to reconcile the opposing factions were consistently insufficient. Furthermore, The discord between the young nation's president and vice president exacerbated the issues, lending credibility to both sides without ever resolving the underlying disunity. John Quincy Adams viewed Gran Colombia as a powerful and respectable nation. However, in reality, it was a short-lived federation that struggled to maintain unity throughout its existence.